Gothic 1 Remake is finally becoming a close reality, and it is impossible not to feel the weight of nostalgia. But if you think this new release will just be the same old game with prettier next-gen graphics, you are mistaken. There is a lot going on under the hood, so grab your best weapon and get ready to return to the mining colony, because today we are exploring 10 interesting details about the Gothic 1 Remake that they simply forgot to tell you. I am Matthew, and the video is about to start. At the beginning, the nameless hero is completely clumsy. It almost looks like he doesn't even know how to properly hold a weapon. And this is not just a feeling. You can see it clearly in the animations. As you invest learning points and train with NPCs, the character begins to change for real. The stance becomes firmer, the strikes faster, and that stiff style gives way to much more fluid movements. It is as if you are following the character's physical evolution, not just improving hidden attributes. And the most interesting thing is that this directly impacts the gameplay. Over time, you unlock more precise attacks and combos that depend on timing. So combat stops being just about button mashing and becomes something more technical. You start to feel that you are mastering the system alongside the character. Honestly, this type of progression is much more satisfying than the standard in many RPGs. Here, you do not get strong out of nowhere. You learn, train, and evolve visibly. And this creates a much greater connection with the character, because every improvement is something you actually notice in practice. One of the things that caught my attention the most about the Gothic 1 Remake is how they did not simply improve the game, they practically recreated everything from scratch. And that makes a massive difference. The choice of Unreal Engine 5 was not just for pretty graphics, but to breathe new life into a world that back then was limited by the technology of the era. If you played the original Gothic, you remember that stiffer look, with rigid models and simple environments. Now imagine that same world, but with dynamic lighting, realistic shadows, and a level of detail that makes everything feel much more alive. Unreal Engine 5 allows exactly that, especially with technologies like global illumination that completely change the game's atmosphere. And here comes the most interesting point. Gothic has always had a very strong identity, a heavy, almost oppressive, dark fantasy. With this graphical leap, that feeling was not only maintained but amplified. Places that used to be just dark now convey a real sense of danger and tension, as if the environment were constantly watching you. To me, this shows that the remake is not just easy nostalgia. It is a real attempt to reinterpret the classic game with the level of immersion we expect today. And honestly, when a remake manages to respect the original while evolving everything in this manner, that is when it truly becomes interesting. Right off the bat, one of the most interesting changes I found is not in combat or graphics, but in the game world itself. The mining colony has been expanded by up to 30%, and this changes much more than it seems at first glance. It is not just a larger map, it is a space that aims to be more alive and more natural to explore. The detail that caught my attention the most is that they did not follow the approach of copying everything exactly as it was. Instead of recreating the original map one-to-one, the remake reinterprets this world, adding new areas and adjusting the overall structure. This gives a sense of novelty even to those who know Gothic inside out. Xardus' tower is a great example of this change in philosophy. In the original game, a lot of things were resolved with teleportation, which was practical but also quite limited in terms of immersion. Now, with new floors and structural stairs, the place gains a much stronger and more realistic presence within the world. And honestly, this type of alteration shows that the remake does not just want to revive nostalgia, but to improve the experience as a whole. By removing these shortcuts and turning everything into something more physical and explorable, the game has everything it needs to deliver a much stronger immersion, something that has always been the heart of Gothic. One of the coolest things about this remake, in my opinion, is that it is not just recreating Gothic 1, it is somewhat completing the original game. A lot of things that Piranha Bytes wanted to include back in 2001 ended up being left out due to a lack of time and budget, and now those ideas are finally coming to life. And this is no small feat. The developers have already stated that around 20 to 25% of the content is new, mainly in side quests and lore expansion. In other words, even those who finished the original Gothic multiple times will find brand new content here, and not just small details, but content that truly deepens the game world. What excites me most about this is the factions part. Gothic has always been very strong in this aspect, with each camp having its own identity, rules, and conflicts. Now, with this lore expansion, we can expect richer interactions, more complete stories, and perhaps even more impactful decisions within these groups. This is the kind of remake that is truly worth it. It not only respects the original, but also seizes the opportunity to bring back everything that was left on paper years ago. It is almost as if we are seeing the version the developers always wanted to make, but now without the limitations of that era. One thing that might divide opinions quite a bit is this decision to completely cut modern conveniences. No minimap, no on-screen compass. It is just you and the game world, without that constant help that most RPGs offer nowadays. And look, this completely changes the way you play. Instead of simply following a marker, you will need to actually pay attention to the environment, memorize paths, and use landmarks. That mountain on the horizon, a distinct tree, a specific building, all of this becomes genuinely important for navigation. Another detail I found very interesting is the use of physical maps within the game itself. You do not start knowing everything. You need to buy maps from NPCs and learn to orient yourself based on them. This creates a much more immersive feeling, as if you were truly trying to survive in that world, rather than just following a disguised GPS. Honestly, this might scare off those who are used to more guided games, but at the same time, it is exactly the kind of choice that gives Gothic its identity. It is a world that does not adapt to you. You are the one who needs to adapt to it. And for those who enjoy this raw and challenging type of experience, this could be one of the remake's greatest strengths. Gothic has always had a very distinct identity, and a big part of that came from the way the characters spoke. It was not that kind of RPG with pretty or overly heroic dialogue. It was direct, sometimes even slightly uncomfortable. And the remake clearly understood this because instead of reinventing everything, they decided to bring back several original voice actors, especially from the German and Polish versions. This already shows tremendous care because a voice is not just a detail, it is personality. When you hear a character, you can already feel if they are trustworthy, arrogant, dangerous, or just another survivor in that hostile world. And keeping those classic voices helps a lot to preserve the identity that made Gothic so unique. Now, the point that surprised me the most was the change in the English version. They basically threw away the old translation and started from scratch. And the reason is simple. The original German version had a much rawer and heavier tone, which ended up being softened when it was adapted years ago. This time, the idea is to fully respect that essence. All of this gives me the feeling that the remake does not just want to look like Gothic, it wants to sound like Gothic 2. And for those who value immersion, this kind of detail carries much more weight than it seems, because that is when the game world truly begins to convince you that it exists. If there is one thing that really caught my attention in the Gothic 1 remake, it is the level of care put into the artificial intelligence and NPC routines. It is not the type of world where characters stand still waiting for you to arrive. Here, everyone seems to have a life of their own, following schedules, working, eating, sleeping, everything happening quite naturally. This completely changes the way you interact with the game. You can no longer just trespass anywhere or steal without thinking, because the NPCs actually react. If you mess with what you shouldn't, they notice, become aggressive, and the consequences come instantly. This makes everything more tense and even more strategic. Another point I found very interesting is how the game draws a bit from that more hardcore survival approach. The world reacts to you. If your character is dirty or struggling, it can affect how others perceive you. It's reminiscent of games like Kingdom Come: Deliverance in that sense, where small details make a difference in the experience. In the end, all of this contributes to a type of immersion that few games can deliver today. It is not just about completing quests, but about existing in that world and respecting its rules. And honestly, this kind of system makes every decision feel more important because the game is always reacting to what you do. There is a very curious story behind this game that honestly could have defined it in a completely different way. Back in 2019, THQ Nordic released a playable teaser to gauge public reaction And the response was much more negative than they expected. The problem was that that version looked too modern, more colorful, more accessible, almost as if it were trying to please a broader audience. But Gothic was never about that. Anyone who knows the franchise knows that its charm lies precisely in that heavy, strange, and even slightly uncomfortable atmosphere. And fans noticed immediately that it was straying from the essence. The most interesting part is that instead of ignoring the criticism, they actually took it seriously. A large part of that prototype was discarded, and the project practically restarted with the creation of Alchemia Interactive, a studio focused on making the remake while respecting the game's original spirit much more. This ends up being one of those rare cases where community feedback actually changes the destiny of a game. Instead of following a safer and more generic path, they decided to step back and embrace what made Gothic special, even if it meant starting all over again. One thing that got me very excited was the return of Kai Rosenkrantz. If you played the original, even if you don't remember everything, you probably remember the feeling that the soundtrack conveyed. It had that melancholy, slightly mysterious vibe that perfectly matched the game world. And it is not just a symbolic return either. He is reorchestrating practically all the classic tracks, bringing a more modern version richer in detail, but without losing that essence that marked each area. It is like taking something that already worked very well and giving it a new layer of depth. In addition, he is also creating brand new music for the new areas and content that were added in the remake. This is important because it ensures the game does not just stay stuck in the past, but also establishes its own identity in the new parts without breaking immersion. The most interesting thing here is that the soundtrack in Gothic was never just background music. It helped build tension, isolation, and even the sense of constant danger. Having the same composer handle this again provides immense confidence that this atmosphere will remain as memorable as before, or even more so. One thing that many people might not even notice at first, but that makes a huge difference, is the visual variety of the NPCs in the Gothic 1 remake. You know that classic RPG problem where everyone looks somewhat the same, only changing clothing colors? Here they went completely in the opposite direction. The developers created their own tool called Maestro precisely to avoid this. With it, each NPC has a unique face, details, and characteristics. It is not just a basic variation, these are differences that actually make you feel that each character there is an individual, and not just another model repeated across the map. And this goes beyond faces. Even the armor sets, which would normally be standardized, have small variations. Wear and tear, scars, subtle things, but they make everything more believable. And in the case of the Brotherhood of the Sleeper, for example, the tattoos were made with the help of a professional tattoo artist, which provides a level of authenticity that is quite rare to see. In the end, all this care helps a lot with immersion, because when each NPC looks unique, the world automatically feels more alive. You start to recognize people, remember who is who, and this greatly strengthens the feeling of being inside a real place rather than just a game full of copies walking around.
Sometimes I ask where the stars have gone. Are they hiding from my eyes?